Welcome to the latest edition of CEO Growth Talks from Chief Outsiders. I'm your host, Angus Robertson, and today we have partner and fractional CMO, Per Ohstrom. We're going to be talking about how to maximize profitability and pricing strategy for industrials. I'm particularly interested in how segmentation can affect pricing strategy, which Per is going to dive into in just a little bit. So without further ado, Per, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your background?
Sure. Yeah, I have been working in and with industrial companies probably for close to 30 years by now, starting in heavy manufacturing and then construction equipment, other types of industrial equipment rental, industrial services, all kinds of B2B activities. So that's really my sweet spot, B2B marketing, especially with the focus on industrials.
And Per, I know that there's a particular sub-segment that accidentally you've become quite an expert in and helped sort of stand apart within the group of 120 or so CMOs we have here.
Yeah, it's the incredibly exciting area of electrical gear. It sounds boring, but it's the kind of stuff that makes sure that what comes through the power lines that you see on the horizon actually works in your home. And there's a lot going on right now with solar, wind, and so on. So pretty exciting electrical gear. What can I say?
Sounds great. Absolutely. Well, let's dive right in. And Per, so what can companies do when they see shrinking margins?
Yeah, there's several things, and the obvious one, of course, is to lower the costs. But you have to be really careful when you go about reducing your costs to do it in such a way that it doesn't hurt you long term. It's also a good idea to take a closer look at the strategy, and then, of course, take pricing action, which is mostly what we will be talking about today. But when it comes to lowering costs, you can do obvious things like look for second. Make sure that you get the best possible prices for your input. You can outsource functions. Like, for instance, IT is oftentimes outsourced, especially in smaller companies. But you can also outsource things like payroll, or even accounting, bookkeeping, things like that. And that might make sense from a cost perspective. I think the most important thing to do is continuous improvement. It's looking at your operations on an ongoing basis. Make sure that you run as lean as you can. And in that case, it makes a lot of sense to train or hire a couple of black belts or green belts that can help guide you through a Six Sigma exercise and actually take costs permanently out of your operation instead of doing some kind of savings initiative that'll work for a while and then the costs go back up. So those are kind of my favorite cost reduction strategies. But let's talk about business strategy.
Okay. Well, and just on the lowering the costs, I worked at a public company that was subject to a hostile takeover, and the new investor put themselves in as chairman of the board and put his friends in as other members of the board. And he asked the question, why do you want to be profitable? Because then you can control your destiny. And one of the biggest initiatives we had was to outsource our manufacturing to contract manufacturing. And all of a sudden we became the most profitable in our sector, delivering $100 million in profit on a $500 million business, which dramatically changed our fortune. So I absolutely resonate with that thinking.
Yeah, great example.
All right. So talking about business strategy, what are some of the elements that, Per, you think it's important to keep in mind when looking at business strategy?
There's a few things to keep in mind, and you might not need to do a complete bottoms-up strategy review. It might be enough to kind of look at the strat plan and ask yourself a few questions. Like, for instance, what's my growth engine? Where do I grow? Which market segments, products, or customers are actually contributing to my company growth? And those you want to protect, right? You don't want to lose weight by cutting off a leg, right? You want to make sure that you're still viable in the long run. And the same goes for your sources of volume. Some products might not have great margins, but the volume might be such that they keep your plant running, right? It could be that you have your base volume, 80% of your volume, churning out a product day in and day out. And then the remaining 20% of your volume, you can sell at much higher margin. So those are the kinds of things that you want to protect. You also always need to take a look at what the competitors do and what are their value propositions, because the gap between the value you provide and the value a competitor or another solution provide, that's really your pricing space, right? So if they are catching up with you, your pricing opportunities and your freedom to price is going to decrease. One of the most important things when you look at strategy, and I've been harping on this with every last client I've been working on, look at the segmentation, right? Because oftentimes when you talk to companies, especially manufacturing companies, you ask them, what are your different segments? And they'll say, oh, product A segment is such and such, and the product B segment is such and such. That's not how you segment. You segment by looking at customer needs. And then among all the customers and prospects out there that have similar needs, those are the ones you group into a segment. And then you sell them something that solves their problems, that alleviates their pinch points, right? So it's really important when you segment to look at their needs, but also what the substitutes are, right? If you are selling drills, you're not in the drill market, you are in the hole making market, right? So customers might be making holes using lasers or high pressure water jets or what have you. And you need to understand all of those, and you need to come up with a solution for that specific problem that is better than what anyone else has. Another angle to look at it that's pretty interesting is whatever you sell your customers, does it help them to reduce their cost or to increase their volume, right? So for instance, if I manufacture and sell automotive paint, maybe I'll come up with a new paint formulation where it's enough to paint an auto part twice instead of doing 3 or 4 layers, right? And you still get the same result. In that case, I reduce their cost, right? And increase their throughput. However, if I come up with a paint formulation that's environmentally beneficial, maybe it's a water-based instead of a solvent-based paint, and I sell this to an auto manufacturer, they can go out and actually market the vehicle as more environmentally friendly because of this, right? Now I give them an opportunity to increase their selling price, right? Because they can now add a benefit to their car. So those are the kinds of things that you need to keep in mind when you segment.
I really liked what you talked about with segmentation, really understanding the kinds of companies and titles or personas that those companies you're selling to, and categorizing them into a reasonably sized segment, because it helps the focus on value-based selling. And I think you talked a little bit about value-based selling. How do you think about value-based selling as compared to cost plus, or selling relative to competitive pricing?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. But when you sell to other companies, what we call B2B, there's usually not a single person that makes the purchasing decision, but there's some kind of buying team on the receiving end. And they discuss amongst themselves, they evaluate the alternatives, and they all weigh in depending on their specific perspective. And that's where personas are important, right? If you sell to the chemical industry or to a paint manufacturer, there might be a lab person that you need to talk to. There might be a purchasing agent you need to talk to. There might be a department head. There might be an operations person that actually runs the plant where the paint is assembled. And all of them, they have some interests in common, but they also have slightly different interests from each other. And your value proposition, your selling pitch needs to cover all of their concerns, right? So it's incredibly important to understand who is involved in the purchasing process. And it's different too, right? If I sell a machine part to a equipment manufacturer, a couple of gears or something that I make and sell, that sell might be pretty straightforward. And once I'm specified in, it might just be a situation of reordering, right? If I sell nuclear power plants, that are several $1 billion each, then the buying process is going to be a lot more complex. There's going to be many, many more people involved in making the decision. And each sale is going to be different, right? So I'm going to have a whole selling team that interacts with the whole purchasing team and kind of shepherds that deal through. And it can take years, months, if not years, to get to an order. So it all depends on kind of the scale, but it's really important to understand the buying team.
So at the beginning of this section, you talked about growth engines. Do you have any particular strategies for identifying growth engines within a business? And then what should the business do once that's been identified relative to their pricing strategy?
Yeah, the growth engines, really the easiest way to do it is to look in the rearview mirror, right? To see over the last several periods, where has the growth been coming from? And that's a pretty straightforward, spreadsheet type analysis almost, where you look at selling sales numbers, for the different product groups. And once you see that some are doing better, growing faster, and maybe showing a good margin, you drill a little bit deeper. It's also a question of taking what we have today and marrying that with what we know or what we think we know about the future. So understanding the current situation and then looking at the market opportunity out there, because a real growth engine has a lot of headroom, right? It's not something where you already have 80% market share, because then you will only grow with the speed of the market growth. But you want to be in an opportunity, you want to be in a situation where you can take share, you can take market share, you can also take share of wallet with existing customers. That would be, the growth engine. And then of course you have to plot and scheme in order to get that growth, right? Because I've seen all kinds of companies, like you can imagine, right? Some companies that are really progressive and forward-looking, looking around the corner, always happy to kind of position themselves in the right way. I've also seen companies that are, standing still, atrophying, and just waiting to die and fall into the tar pit and disappear. So there's everything in between, but most of that you can kind of tackle by really being intentional about doing your strategy work. And that's the kind of stuff that I love to do, and that's the kind of stuff that I know you and a lot of the colleagues at Chief Outsiders are really excelling in, right? Because we've done it so many times, so we understand how it works.
Yeah, and I think you highlighted something really important there. It's like, how can you grow faster than the market in general? Do you have that sustainable differentiation relative to that market demand, where you can win an unfair number of opportunities and take share within existing customers? And that's a fantastic place to be.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Per, I know based on your experience with pricing that many organizations that you work with don't have a discipline for raising prices and doing that consistently. Isn't that, the simplest path here, the simplest solution here, to raise prices?
Yeah, well, that's what you see oftentimes, right? It's we start talking about pricing, and I ask the CEO, so how do you guys price? And they say, oh, we have a 30% margin. Okay, so but how do you price? How do you set the price? Well, we look at the manufacturing cost, and then we add 30% on top, and that's our margin. Okay, so that's what we call cost plus pricing, right? And that's kind of a floor. You don't want to be below your cost, of course, when you price, but at the same time, you really want to understand the value that your product adds with the customer. We talked earlier about, there's two ways of adding value to customers. One is to help them reduce their costs, and the other one is to help them sell more, help them charge a premium for their product. And that's the thing, of course, in B2B. If I make a machine part and I sell it to a manufacturer, it becomes part of what they do, right? So it's sometimes difficult for me to understand how much of the value of the finished product does my contribution make. But if I take the time and I do that analysis, I crunch those numbers, I can have a pretty good idea how much I can charge for whatever I sell. Let's use another example from the chemical industry, right? If somebody is making a product that has a certain load of an additive that's really expensive, say you're making paint again, and you use a lot of titanium dioxide in the paint in order to make it really white and shiny. If I can come up with a product that helps you use less titanium dioxide, which is really expensive, right? Then I can actually help you reduce your costs, and you can even if you sell the paint at the same price, you still make a lot more than you did before. So I come up with let's call it a dispersion aid, right? That attaches to the little titanium particles and spread them more evenly through the paint, right? Here's a solution to a problem that the customer maybe even didn't know that they had, right? So now all of a sudden they can cut the white titanium dioxide into half or down to 1/3 of what they used to use. Tremendous savings for them, right? And that's the kind of product then that I can charge a lot for, because even if I charge a lot for it, it still saves them money. Another way of looking at it, which is a little bit easier, is to ask yourself, how unique is the part that I sell? If I make a product that nobody else really makes, I can probably raise the price of that one more than if I buy and resell nuts and bolts that they can source anywhere. So the more unique my product is, the more pricing latitude I have. Another really popular approach that you see a lot is to offer like 2 or 3 options. So here's a really good one, right? Here's a good battery that I can sell you. But here's a better one, and here's the best one. And I can then discriminate the pricing between the 3. So the good is selling at a good margin, the better at a slightly better, and then the best, I can really crank the price up on that one and really, really get a good margin. And here's a trick that I'll share for free. When you advertise your good, better, and best pricing, do it in the opposite order. Start with the best, and then the better, and then the good. Because people read from left to right. So if they see the price of your best battery is $10, and the better one is $6, and the good one is $3, if they read the $10 first, that's the price that kind of shapes sets the boundaries in their mind, right? So then they'll compare everything against the $10, and you'll be in a slightly better place, right? Another thing that a lot of manufacturers do is they can actually insource stuff from somewhere. So they can go to China, or they can go to Vietnam or someplace and buy, simple products that aren't highly engineered, but that are still a good quality, and they can sell them as a private label product. So, if I have a computer parts company, I can offer the fancy branded computer parts. I can also sell them the Per Ohstrom computer parts that are much, much cheaper and generic, right? And that might still allow me to charge a better margin. So even though the selling price is low, the margin will be really, really good on the private label. Another thing that I've done a lot is bundle products or do kits. So for instance, if you sell water pumps, they have certain parts that need replacement every now and then. Things like gaskets, right? So they get worn out after a while. So rather than selling a gasket and have the customer go to the hardware store to get the right nuts and bolts and make sure they have the right tools and everything, why don't I sell them a bundle? So here's the gasket, here's the 2 screws, here's the 1 nut, here's all the parts that you need in order to do the gasket replacement yourself. And if that saves them time, I can actually charge more for the bundle than the sum of the parts that are in it, right? In some cases, if you want to maintain or protect your market share, you have to do it the other way around. So instead of having cheap imports come in and steal your gasket price, you can put together a bundle, right? And you can sell it cheaper. So if you buy the bundle, it's going to be cheaper than buying all the pieces one by one. And then you might keep the business and you won't lose it to the cheap imports. The last example of reframing the price that I want to share is to, you look at if you're an established company, you've been around for a while, you have a decent product range, you will have some customers that are, they have been buying something from you for years and years. And it might be a product that you really only make for one or two customers anymore because they're the only ones buying it. And there might be newer generations of the same product that you can be able to migrate them over to. So even if you have to give them a more favorable price than you give other customers buying the same product, it still might make a lot of sense, because now you don't have to run and stock that old product anymore, and you don't have to source raw material for it and so on. So migrating customers away from an old product that you discontinue into a new one, I sometimes call it keep the cannibal in the family, right? So rather than losing them to somebody else, you still have them there as a customer, and your overall cost picture improves a little bit. So a lot of reframing there.
Yeah, Per, I love those practical examples, and I think they're really valuable in understanding that value from a sales perspective, because you're making it a lot easier for the salesperson to follow through with a sale for a product by positioning about the costs that salesperson can save the customer, or the increased volume that salesperson can save the customer, or increase for the customer. Mm-hmm. When you work with your clients, it seems that this is a key part for understanding the value. In other words, connecting marketing with sales, with finance, and the product organization, so that the product organization has some direction and understanding of what they're doing and the value it delivers to that customer. How do you think about that, and how do you bring that awareness into the organization so that hidden value can be discovered or worked from?
Yeah, I'd say the first and most important thing is for people to actually talk to each other, right? And you'll be surprised when you visit companies, and the sales guys are road warriors, and they're out there all the time, and they show up at the headquarters once a quarter in order to get their sales trophy, and that's about it, right? They have a little bit of communication with the sales manager, and maybe a sales leader will travel with them occasionally, especially the newer guys, have some windscreen time with them, teach them the ropes, the tricks of the trade. But it's really important to have kind of formal communication between sales and marketing and product. And also, you want your finance function in a company to be not, the arbiter and the judge, but they need to be business people. They need to understand that there's things you do sometimes that'll affect the margin in a positive way, but also sometimes you take risk in order to end up in a better place, right? And if the company has been around for a while, and the accounting system is what it is, and the CFO, he's a guy who's been here, or a gal who's been here for 20 or 30 years, it's hard to teach old dogs not to sit, right? And I mean that in a respectful way. But sometimes, redefining what you sell is really interesting. And this is something that you read about, like in the business press these days, and you see a few examples, but I think we're going to see a lot more of this. So in its kind of simplest form is, instead of you selling a physical good, you add on layers and layers and layers of services onto that good. So it can be simple things like, a warranty. And if you sell a product and you put a 2-year warranty on it, you can charge a little bit more, right? You can add installation, you can add service contracts, and we see that a lot. Those are the kinds of things that many companies do. And if you have a service contract and you go out and you inspect the piece of equipment that you sold to a manufacturing plant, or to a electrical utility, or to a water and wastewater utility, you sold them a pump, and you go out and you inspect these pumps and make sure that they work the way they should, and you service them and you replace the gaskets and everything. Not only do you get paid for doing all that, but you also have a really good idea about when the product is starting to reach the end of its life cycle and it's time to replace it, right? And again, you keep the cannibal in the family. You get the deal instead of somebody else that comes in with a lower price product. We see some innovative pricing approaches like activity-based pricing. So for instance, if I'm Airbus or Boeing, right, I don't buy the engines that go on my plane. I buy the number of hours those engines are running, right? So if I have Rolls-Royce engines on my plane, I pay them so many thousands of dollars for each hour that the engine is running. They do all the maintenance. They do all the repairs. If an engine needs to be replaced, then their mechanics are there. Take away the old one, put in a new one. I don't have to worry about that. And all I pay for is the number of hours that I'm up in the air, right? And similar to that are what we see in software a lot, subscription models, right? Where you pay for using the software per seat per month or per seat per year or something like that. And that's sometimes difficult for manufacturing companies, right? Depending on what you sell, it's difficult to have a subscription model, but you can kind of move in that direction by charging a fixed and a variable price. So for instance, you sell something and maybe you charge, instead of charging 100% selling price, you charge the equivalent of half the selling price, and the other half you make up by sending a monthly invoice based on the usage of the product. And these days, there's all kinds of technology to understand how much a machine is used, right? So for instance, I remember when I was in equipment rental, we put GPS systems on our backhoes and earth moving equipment, right? So we knew when the engine was running. We used geofencing, so we knew when the machine kind of left the little lot inside the oil refinery where it was parked. We knew when it drove through the geofence, and now we went on rent, right? And then when they parked it back and turned off the engine, it went off rent. So we could charge for those hours and minutes that it was actually being used. We loved it because it was easy. We didn't have to do all the paperwork and deliver and pick up big pieces of equipment. Customers loved it too because they only paid for the actual minutes you used them. And pricing was never an issue. List price was never an issue. They always paid list, right? So the margins were really good. So that's, I think, an interesting way of doing it. And regardless, if you redefine the product or if you reframe the pricing somehow, you have to communicate with the customers, right? You have to let them know that this is a premium product. That's why we're charging a premium price. Or this is a run-of-the-mill, good basic product, and that's why we're charging this price. It cannot be a surprise or a mystery to the customer. How much is this really, right? Because these days, it's not like customers go online and they look at a few companies' websites, and then they call a few salespeople, and that salespeople come out and they talk about products and pricing. It's the other way around. They go through all these different purchasing steps just looking online, and they want to know how much the product is. They want to know the cost of using your product, and we have to accommodate that, even though it feels a little bit awkward perhaps.
I think there's some great ideas. I like how you're taking some of the concepts on usage from the world of software and applying it to industrials, and thinking about the business driver of the customer and how pricing can support the success of the customer's business. And of course, those customers who are using the equipment more, that can be a more profitable customer over time, and prioritize where sales activity is, or potentially where company investment lies too.
Sure, yeah.
Well, Per, I really appreciate you taking the time today to share some of your pricing best practices and experience from all the years you've had working with industrials and connecting those dots between the market and product and sales. Are there any last takeaways or best practices you want to leave with the audience?
Yeah, there's one actually. Whenever we sell something, there's a contract, right? And then at the end of the contract, there's 6 or 10 pages of terms and conditions. And usually those terms and conditions are pretty specific, right? So if we raise price, you have to pay it. If we add a surcharge, or we have the right to add a surcharge if oil prices go up or something like that, it's a really good idea to enforce those terms. They can add several basis points, if not percent, to your margin.
Fantastic. Thanks, Per. So if a CEO of a manufacturer or an industrial company or a general manager wants to engage with you and talk about pricing, how should they do that? And what does that look like in terms of just getting started?
Yeah, the easiest way is probably just to reach out to me on LinkedIn, or go to Chief Outsiders and search for my name on our list of consultants, and use that form to get in touch with me. And I'll be happy to chat. No obligation, of course, but just we can kind of frame the problem and see if this is something that we can help you with. And if I can't do it, then I can always find one of my colleagues that has the bandwidth and the opportunity to help.
Fantastic. Thanks again, Per, and take advantage of Per's offer. You'll certainly have a chance to learn from his experience. So thanks again, and look forward to seeing everybody on the next Chief Outsiders CEO Growth Talks.
Thanks, Angus. Thanks.